Değerli konuklarımız, hoş geldiniz. Borusan Contemporary'nin 2023-2024 sergi programı paralelinde hazırlanan Yarınları Duymak başlıklı konuşma serisinin ilk etkinliğinde sizleri ağırlamaktan mutluluk duyuyoruz bugün. İki değerli konuğumuz, küratör ve yazar sevgili Çelenk Bafra ve geçici sergi programımız kapsamında solo sergisi Aritmi ile ağırlamaktan büyük mutluluk duyduğumuz sanatçı dostumuz Met Koluşov'a teşekkür ediyorum. Yarınları duymak, güncel sergilerimiz aritmi ve dijital mitolojilerden ilham aldı. Yarının sesini yalnızca ekoloji ve doğa alanında değil, kültür, ekonomi, sosyoloji ve sanat alanında da daha çok duymaya ihtiyacımız olduğunu görüyoruz. Giorgio Agamben'in çağdaşlığı tariflerken kurduğu analojide de olduğu gibi, bugünün sessizliğinde yarınlardan gelen sesleri duymanın, duymaya çalışmanın, onlara kulak vermenin belki de çağdaşlığın bir gereğindedir diye düşünüyorum. Ve sözü sevgili Çelenk'e ve Mete bırakıyorum.
Çok teşekkür ederim ben de. Konuşmanın bundan sonraki kısmında İngilizce devam edeceğiz. Borusan Contemporary, teşekkürlerle. Good afternoon, my name is Çelenk. I'm a curator from Istanbul that hosts on this very weekend major events in contemporary arts and culture, including Akaretler Art Week, C.I. Bloom Art Fair, and the Istanbul Film Festival. So thank you for joining us amongst this inflation, amongst this boom of contemporary events. And I'm very honored to present and have a conversation with the renowned artist Matt Kolishov today, who is a contemporary artist from the UK, known for his extraordinary, multi-layered and often provocative work that spans various media, from works on paper and photography to sculpture and immersive installations, not to forget multi-channel video projections that are also on view here. Matt is also one of the pioneering artists to introduce digital tools and technology, such as computer-generated images, digital manipulation, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality in his practice. And he gained global prominence as soon as the early 1990s, and he was one of the key figures, key members of the young British artists. He is also no stranger to the Istanbul art scene and Istanbul audiences. Since the fourth Istanbul Biennial in 1995, he has been coming frequently to Istanbul and made 3 solo exhibitions in 3 different art institutions in the last 15 years. Matt, I'd like to start with a warm-up question, if I may. It's been almost 30 years since the maestro curator Rene Bloch introduced you, together with a roster of prominent conceptual and contemporary artists and artworks of the time, mid-1990s, under the Biennale title Orientation in Istanbul. So would you remind us of your first experiences in Istanbul, the work you exhibited first time in Istanbul under this very iconic Istanbul Biennial that has become a historical one now, and what has been your relation to our city that hosts you once again since August with a comprehensive solo exhibition?
Yeah, hi everybody. It took me a while to first arrive in Istanbul. I think I was 29 when I first came in 1995. And one of the great opportunities that being an artist presents is that when you travel, you are generally working within the city. So you get to experience a little bit of behind the scenes. You see things that a general tourist wouldn't really engage with, which is a real advantage. Prior to the Biennale in 1995, I think my general impression of Istanbul was formed from the film Midnight Express, which is probably not the best idea of what I was going to experience when I got here. Anyway, I loved it as soon as I arrived here. I very much enjoy being in cities that do the business of a city, in that they are busy, dynamic. It's a city that's not without conflict. It's a city that's constantly trying to establish itself and resolve issues within it. And that bustle and the street life and the activity and the contrast between historical buildings and modernity, all of these things were the ingredients for a very fertile environment for me for art and many other things. And the first work that I showed in the Istanbul Biennale that Rennie Block curated was a very small artwork, and it was a projection onto a piece of frosted glass. It was in a church, and I can't remember the name of the church, but it was in a tiny little alcove, and then you would discover this little projection on the floor. And it was a film that I'd made of a little homeless guy sleeping in a shop doorway, which had been transposed into a little snow shaker, like the little gimmicky toys that you get from gift shops or the airport, places like that. So you had this very real social drama happening inside this cheap and kind of sentimental little device. It was an artwork I made after walking many times down Oxford Street in London, where you would often find homeless people asleep in the doorway, which you would have some emotional response towards because of this very graphic scene of destitution. And then you would be onto another shop which had a very elaborate window dressing, which was all also moving you emotionally in some way. So I wanted to make this artwork about how vulnerable we are to emotional manipulation. Sometimes it's genuine and sometimes it's entirely fabricated, and it's like a mechanistic response based on how people design certain systems to make you think or feel in a certain way. But it was a fantastic opportunity and an introduction to Istanbul, to get to visit so many venues and meet so many people and understand the basic geography and the way things worked there. And since then, I've been coming back pretty regularly. I was also in the Biennale in 2011, as well as the 3 other exhibitions, quite major exhibitions I've made here. So I've probably been coming to Istanbul and showing in Istanbul more consistently than most other cities. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity it's presented to me. I could have one more thing, which is I was reminded recently of that first trip in 1995, because my family took in a Ukrainian refugee and her daughter. And in order to do this, you must have certain official checks to check that you are a competent person and that you're not a danger to the refugees. But the refugee and her daughter were so desperate for somewhere to live that we actually took them in before I got the accreditation to demonstrate that I was okay to accept a refugee. And a few weeks later, I got this paper through, and I was just putting it into my files because I thought it's no longer necessary because we've already got the situation established. And then I saw in the paper that it says something about selling heroin in Istanbul. So I studied it a little bit closer, and it appeared to be saying that I'd been arrested for trafficking heroin in Istanbul in the 90s. I'd then been convicted, and I'd served 2 years in an Istanbul prison from like 1997 to 1999. And this is very strange and confusing because although my memories of the 1990s is quite vague, I think I remember doing 2 years inside a prison in Istanbul. And I started to think about it. And then I remembered when I was there for the Biennale on the final night, I lost my passport. And I then had to go to the British Embassy and knock on the door and wake up the British ambassador to get some special paperwork so I could get back to London. So I think what sort of happened is that somebody's got the passport and they were using it and they were arrested, and then they actually went to prison on my name in the late 90s.
Well, thank you, Matt.
Anyway, that's all resolved now. Digression. Maybe we should move on to the
Thank you for sharing this. It was a flashback, and thank God it did not turn into Midnight Express 2 at the end. Thank you also, Matt, for sharing us for information about the very first artwork that you shared in Istanbul back in 1995, which was an art historical exhibition for all of us. It was like a school. It was like a museum show for the Istanbul audiences. And it's really nice to know that Istanbul has been inspiring you, that you have been coming frequently to Istanbul. And one of your very recent artworks, which is on view here now at Borusan Contemporary, is also inspired by Istanbul and Borusan Contemporary's, the building's very location, which is alongside the Bosphorus. The title is Pandora. It is as dramatic as this Midnight Express story that you would have. But how did Istanbul and the Bosphorus inspired you and your last work titled Pandora, which is on view here at Borusan Contemporary?
Obviously, the Bosphorus is like an unavoidable factor in your whole experience of the city. And particularly because the Bosphorus is right there. When you're in the Borusan, it's situated right on the edge of the water. So it's very much present when you're inside the center. And we talked about some way of making artworks which referred to the Bosphorus. And we started to focus on marine biology because there were certain environmental issues to do with climate warming, where the effects were potentially quite damaging to certain species within the Bosphorus. And I started to look at these images of Ernst Haeckel, made 130 years ago, these beautiful and exquisite, fascinating depictions of tiny little marine organisms. And these became the seed for the idea that led to this artwork. And I started experimenting with some artificial intelligence image generation. And it occurred to me that what was happening when I was generating these images was not dissimilar to what happens with genes and evolution, and that it's all code, and that digital code is binary, whereas genetic code is quaternary, but it's still information that's being passed on, and that the evolution is unsentient. It throws up these mutations, and then natural selection determines which one will survive. And with the artificial intelligence, also an unsentient medium, which was just throwing up these images based on the input that I gave to it. So I tried to make an equivalent. I thought, if these marine organisms are being affected detrimentally, then maybe I can introduce something to the DNA of the Ernst Haeckel drawings. So I used Ernst Haeckel, and I used lots of other kind of components of marine organisms. And then I used an image of Albrecht Dürer's Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse as a base image. And so that the images that are generated, they resembled the Ernst Haeckel images of marine biological organisms, but they were infused with the DNA of Albrecht Dürer's apocalyptic image of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. So whereas the images by Haeckel are kind of quite positive and optimistic looking, they're beautifully colored and they're exquisitely executed. The images that I was generating had a darker side to them. They were quite tumultuous, and it suggested that all was not well, and there were certain negative currents feeding into these microorganisms. And there are some of the images that I generated on the first entrance to the exhibition. And then I decided to make a large black and white drawing of one of the images that I chose. And I used charcoal as a medium for this. I thought it was kind of quite interesting to use like one of the very first mark making media. It's just essentially a burnt stick which you're using to make the marks. This very, very primitive technology, and to use that with an image that had been generated with quite cutting-edge technology, image generation by artificial intelligence. So these innocent organisms were poisoned by the apocalypse of Albrecht Dürer.
As we have the privilege to have the artist with us, I'd like to ask you quite a personal point of view about now that we have almost a consensus finally about the climate emergency, natural or handmade catastrophes and other after effects of the Anthropocene, and me, together with a big group of art professionals just back from the exhaustive opening days of the 60th Venice Biennale. I reckon that ecology and nature intertwined with science and technology have become predominant in contemporary art. This is, of course, not one of the new phenomena or a trending topic. I know that it has always been the case throughout the art history. And we tend to associate nature and ecology either with beauty, well-being, harmony, and rhythm, or on the contrary, with irrational disorder and chaos, catastrophes, for example, as opposed to culture and civilization, so nature versus culture or civilization. So my simple question would be, how did you come up with the title Aritmia? What does the term arrhythmia stand for you and your artistic relation, in regards to your artistic relation with nature? And for the conceptual introduction to this solo exhibition of yours, curated by Alice Sharp, dear Alice, you must have discussed the conceptual framework and the title with her. And the second question would be the personal one, having seen so many exhibitions and produced so many works and exhibitions yourself on nature, science, and technology, what is the promises, what is the essence and particularity of this very exhibition, Aritmia, for you, for Matt Collishaw?
I searched for a long time for an idea for a title for the exhibition. I wanted something that could refer to the presence of the Borasan on the Bosphorus, and also to suggest that maybe things are not all well out there with the climate and the environment, and that there is something out of kilter currently. Out of kilter, something unbalanced, that there is an imbalance. And I was reading a lot of terms for a situation where the human body might be considered unwell. And I came across this word arrhythmia, which means like an irregular heartbeat, which suggests that the fluctuations of the heart are not normal, they're abnormal and they're inconsistent, which indicates that there is something is wrong. And it's like by collecting and observing data that we can get this indication that something's wrong. It's about monitoring the heart. So it's kind of about the way that we are trying to observe the planet and monitor it and trying to discover what is wrong. So it's like an analytical process for assessing health. But what also appealed to me was that these fluctuations of the heart resembled in a way the movement of water. And they reminded me, I'm not sure how many people know it, of the cover of the Joy Division album, Unknown Pleasures, designed by Peter Saville, where you have this like very graphic but minimal, like data style technical drawing, which also looks like the waves or the water on the river or a sea or a lake.
The question was, I mean, for you personally, having seen so many exhibitions on nature and science and technology, and having made so many works and exhibitions, what is the particularity, what is special for you in this particular Aritmia exhibition?
Yeah, I started making images that kind of referenced like genetic engineering and sickness appearing on flowers and plants to indicate some kind of malaise, some kind of sickness generally in the world back in the mid-90s. And I've been making a lot of other works that incrementally build on this idea. And I've never really wanted to make work that specifically address certain situations, whether it's social or political. I think for me, it's more effective to make works that allude to certain things that I think are part of the current landscape. So I try to get different ideas and to weave them together into an artwork that when the visitor confronts them, they have to decode for themselves what it is that they're experiencing. And I work with a lot of different techniques and different technologies in order to create these little vignettes or these little puzzles, these tableaus, which people hopefully would invest a little bit of time in trying to work out what it is that I'm depicting and why I'm depicting it. And I'm currently developing another artwork, like an immersive artwork, which I'm working with Haluk Dirika from Istanbul on. And this is it's a depiction again of like a form of Armageddon, of environmental apocalypse. And it's bringing in some text from Dante's Inferno, so not dissimilar to some of the works that I made in the Borosan, where I'm using these 500-year-old images generated by Albrecht Dürer with more modern concerns and trying to fuse them together into the artworks I'm creating. So the works in this Aritmi exhibition at the Borosan are a significant stepping stone for me getting to the next.
It's always like a time travel with you, Matt. Now that you're also focusing on references from Dante's Inferno, and from Renaissance painters, Albrecht Dürer, to 19th century biologists, the settings and aesthetics in general, and the references in your works, especially from and to the Victorian era, but also from Renaissance to futuristic science fiction, it's always like a time travel, but time travel on a roller coaster. You have a very characteristic, almost mashup and crossover kind of aesthetics. By doing this, I believe that you are creating a third space and a third time. That is your signature. It makes your work quite unique and timeless. How would you define it? I mean, maybe you could elaborate a bit more on your upcoming project where you're referring to Dante's Inferno, or your references to the history of nature, the science history, as well as history of literature and art in general.
James Lovelock, the scientist and inventor of the Gaia theory, which is the theory of the Earth as a self-regulating system, I'm going to simplify, but he would say that there are certain problems within science about how we assess what's happening to the environment, because everybody is in their discipline. We have physicists, chemists, biologists, and there is a limited amount of crossover, but what is needed is people interacting with all these disciplines together to understand how everything functions, how everything affects everything else. A good example of somebody who operates like this, which Alice drew my attention to, was Alexander von Humboldt, who I kind of heard of, but I didn't really know that much about. And there was a wonderful book by an author called Andrea Wolf, which I read as this exhibition was being designed. And he's an incredible guy from the time of Goethe, who went out into the world, and he was a polymath. So he tried to understand exactly how all the elements were affecting each other and how human intervention inside the natural world could change the behavior of the planet to its detriment. And as I'm an artist, I have the freedom to draw on whatever source material I can. So it would seem like kind of perverse not to be aware of the wonderful bounty of information that we have and that's been created throughout history. I am not like tied to one particular discipline. I can go out there and explore all these other areas, so it makes sense to me to draw on all of these theories and ideas and to try to bring them together in an artwork that usually engages with technology in some way. And I think it's interesting to work with new technology because it's not saturated with this history. Like, for example, oil painting, there is images, the architecture, the costumes, the ideas within this medium. The residue of history is already within them. But if you take a new technological innovation, it's free of like any historical influence in a way. So to introduce ideas from 300, 500 years ago to this new technology, that contrast between something that's very modern, something that's quite historical, is a rich and interesting area for me.
Been an hour that we started. Before I leave the floor to the questions and remarks, I have one last question for you, Matt, which is about the multisensory aspect and immersiveness in your works. Through sound and music, and I know that you have a particular interest in sound and music, as well as optical illusions, flashing lights, vibration, movement, your installations especially, but also your sculptures, create a stimulating atmosphere and an environment, an immersive environment. For this particular exhibition that is on view until mid-August 2024, you have chosen Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings to accompany even to the end this multi-channel video projection. And I was one of the lucky ones to experience it during the preview, during the press conference, when the Borusan Philharmonic Orchestra performed the piece, this Adagio, live in the video room. This profound melancholy, which is like a thread in your works, this profound melancholy of Adagio for Strings were combined with the moving images and visuals of destruction. It was very striking, very shocking. It was really immersive. You could really feel the sense of a melancholy. How do you contemplate on the immersiveness of your works in general, and how would you imagine that the audience experience these environments that you construct?
I like the idea that an artwork can have an emotional impact on people that are experiencing it. But I think it's important that the choices that you make are informed by some kind of integrity. So, for example, with the choice of this Samuel Barber piece for the film titled Even to the End, I was looking for some music to accompany these visuals that I created. So the whole narrative was mapped out and I'd nearly finished it. And I started to listen to various pieces of music which could accompany it. And at the same time, I'm reading around the subject matter. And I read that Samuel Barber wrote this piece while he was under the influence of Virgil's poem, The Georgics, which addresses the questions of agricultural husbandry. It's like about how we look after the landscape and the trees and the plants and everything there, how we manage it, and how it is constantly under threat from destructive forces, whether they are forest fires or violent storms, floods, etc. So how can we manage the environment, given that the conditions are so volatile? And so this was the inspiration for Barber in creating this piece. And it seemed to fit very well with the ideas that I had inside the film, which was an attempt by humankind to preserve and to distribute certain species of plant around the planet and to keep them safe and to nurture and fertilize and maintain them. And then man's destructive urge to deforest and to create scenes of like kind of barren landscapes where nothing could grow, and this kind of constant battle between these two impulses to nurture and to destroy. So the musical piece sat quite well with that. And if I'm any other element that I'm trying to infuse into the artwork can't just be there for an effect. I don't think I'd ever be in a position where I say, okay, so like this is all right, but I think it needs like a blue flashing light on top that's going to make it a little bit more dynamic to look at. Everything kind of has to be in the DNA of the original idea.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Let me remind the audience that this is the first event of a series of exhibition events within the scope of Aritmi that is ongoing until mid-August 2024. But in May and June, there will be other panel discussions and talks and events. But we wanted to start with a conversation with the artist, with Matt Collistow. So if you have questions or remarks to share with the artist, he's here, and we can take a few questions with the microphone so that it can be recorded. There is one question or remark, Matt.
I have two questions, if I may. First one is, given the rapid pace of technological development, How do you personally keep up with these advancements and continuously upskill yourself, or you collaborate in some instances? Can you please elaborate on this?
Yeah, and I think like one of my motivations for trying to keep up with technology is because if I don't keep up now, I'll totally lose track of everything that's happening, and then I'll never be able to understand anything that's going on at all. So it's partly just an attempt to just keep aware of this very, very rapid changes that are happening as technology evolves. But generally, I do have a few people that I can call or share screens with to go through certain technical issues I have. And I'm really not a very technically equipped person at all. I understand like the basics on a lot of different mediums, but I'm not an expert on any of them, and I don't code. So my understanding is very limited, but I think it's very important, like as an artist, that you can at least understand like the parameters of certain disciplines, and that you can like coherently direct a project in the way that's going to be most effective for it. And if you totally resist the capabilities of the technology, it's very difficult for you to establish what exactly can be done with it. So I have a certain amount of knowledge, and I experiment to a certain degree, and then there are other people I might collaborate with if there's something that's beyond my comprehension.
Would you have a second question?
I have,
Yeah.
if I may.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. At today's art scene, Matt, I sometimes feel that technology can dominate the artistic experience. I mean, potentially overshadowing the art itself. And what are your thoughts on this? How do you navigate the balance between incorporating technology and ensuring the art and your statement remains at the focal point? Thank you.
I guess in a way I try to make this technology invisible, and I think there are a lot of artworks where the technology and the artwork is about the technique, and it's like an effect that's being generated, or the technology is like quite technical, and therefore your primary experience of it is technology. You're experiencing something that is in a language that is not readily accessible by the general human mind. So I try to incorporate ingredients that engage people emotionally, and to use historical ideas, whether that's like art history or musical history or science, philosophy, whatever it is, take things from hundreds of years ago and interweave these ideas with the tech that I'm using, so that your first experience with them is not this kind of unfamiliar dread of being confronted something that is technically beyond you. It's like there are things there that you can kind of relate to because they resemble the world that you've experienced before, and that the technology becomes the almost invisible medium through which those ideas are delivered. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but it's something like that. And I'm also aware that technology has always driven innovations within the arts, the visual arts, particularly from oil painting to the printing press, optics, lenses, photography. All of these technological innovations have informed the way that we see the world and the way we represent the world. So I'm just assuming that it will be wise to keep track of these innovations, because they're changing the way that we experience and interact with the world, not only within the art, but within everything. So it makes sense for me to try to incorporate some of these mediums and these innovations into the artworks that I make.
Any questions? Apparently not. Well, Matt, I take this opportunity to congratulate you once again on your Aritmi exhibition and this conversation with the audience.
Thank you.
Sorry that you cannot see them.
Sorry, I'm not there with you all.
Okay, thanks for coming, all of you.
Yes, thank you for coming. And thank you to the Borusan for being so wonderful in looking after me and putting on the exhibition, and generally being so amazing. And I look forward to my next visit to Istanbul and hopefully another project there. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.